Hey there folks, and welcome back to another Let's Talk About video where I talk about, rant about, and review other games I've been playing. Today I want to talk about Last Epoch. This is a relatively well-known ARPG by 11th Hour Games, which is a completely remote development team. And I say this is relatively well-known because I feel like most players who play ARPG games like Path of Exile or Diablo probably have seen or tried Last Epoch in the past. The game has been in early access for a long time. I think it's been over 2 years since the last time I played, and yeah, it's still in early access. Sadly, I do feel that the dev team being fully remote and scattered across the world tends to slow down the whole dev process since the game is kind of moving at a snail's pace in terms of development. But that's a trite complaint, to be honest. So I know the game's not new, nor is it out of early access, but I've been playing it a bunch lately since I'm up taking care of my father a lot and I don't really have good internet up there. And luckily, Last Epoch is an offline game right now, so I can kind of play it whenever, wherever. The next big update is actually scheduled this year, which is supposed to be the multiplayer update, the 0.90 update, and I believe that Zizeron and Steelmage already have developer videos showcasing all of that, but since the last time I played, Last Epoch has definitely improved considerably, so I just want to talk about my experiences and showcase some of the game's new systems and features, because I'm probably going to keep playing this once the multiplayer comes out, assuming Path of Exile stays on its downward train of Arch Nemesis modifiers, ground degens, and on death effects. And I'm going to keep playing Last Epoch because it has none of that, and it feels good to play. Plus, the Necromancers are good. But anyway, yeah, long introduction, sorry, but let's start about talking about what Last Epoch does that makes it stand out compared to other ARPG games. Starting off with the character classes. Right now, there are the 5 main character classes, each of whom have 3 basic ascendancies they can turn into, which are permanent by the way, no do-overs. Primalist is your standard beef character, Mage, which is Mage, Sentinel, which is more of a melee magic mix dude, Alkalite, which is your Death and Decay Necromancer, Rogue for all the dagger and bow gameplays, and then they branch out from there. Now as I mentioned, you can obviously upgrade your class, but what's cool about this system is that when you do pick your classes, you're not entirely locked out of the skills and points from the ones you didn't pick. You can still go down halfway into their passive trees, which leaves a lot of room to mix and mess around. Now, speaking of the classes and the trees, yes, these passive trees work a lot like standard trees and other RPGs you're seeing. You get like points from leveling and doing quests, and then you can put them in freely, and respec is also pretty cheap. Each 5 points lets you move further down the tree, that sort of thing. And most of your power right now is actually coming from your passive tree and leveling, so there's a lot less stress on gearing, which is hit and miss to be honest. Which does mean though that you can run through most of the campaign without crafting or fretting too much about your damage and defenses, as most of that can be covered just by your passive tree. Now the other unique thing about the characters in Last Epoch are the skills for each character. You can use a pretty large amount of skills, but you can only gain masteries in 5 of these, and these are going to be the ones you actually use. Picking a skill mastery opens up a skill tree for that skill, so every skill in the game has its own skill tree on top that you can customize and kind of move a lot of stuff around. You can also respec points by taking away levels from these skills, which sounds bad I know, but you level these up super fast once you're in the end game. Like you can get from like level 15 to 20, which is capped, in like 2 maps. So there's really not much of a punishment for constantly moving points around, and to test and play around with your build, you can just kind of do that pretty freely. Now speaking of build, the other great aspect about Last Epoch is, from what I've seen, pretty much all the skills are good in some way and usable to do all the endgame content. There are a few couple outliers here and there that are just kind of bad right now from what I've heard, but for the most part, everything can be built around. And as I've been playing, I've discovered that for myself. I think I've respec'd and changed my Necromancer's build like 4 times now. I've seen other skills used, and I just had a good time figuring out what's fun for me, because I know I can make it work regardless, but there's just so much variety you can do with this stuff. Right now, I'm playing a Sacrifice Lich that just blows up all my minions, and it's taken on all of the T4 dungeon bosses, so yeah, it's pretty good time so far. Now, I did mention gearing earlier, and that's the other thing I want to highlight. Since Last Epoch is built as a single-player game, obtaining gear through farming and crafting is actually not that difficult, and it's pretty reasonable to craft your own gear and target farm unique and set items. Sure, some of the more min-maxy stuff can get a little crazy with RNG, but overall the crafting systems they have in place are great for solo play. You can dismantle items to attain their affixes, like suffixes and prefixes, as shards, and then use those shards to put them back into other gear or upgrade the tiers of the matching affix. So you can freely change around items that you find to make them better or fill in attributes that you would need with pretty much no RNG. The only real RNG part of the crafting system is forging potential. Basically, every item has a randomly valued forge potential, which indicates how many times you can craft on it, but crafting takes away a random amount of forging potential, which can be reduced with the help of some crafting items. but you're never really going to know when that forging potential will hit 0, so obviously you can't craft infinitely on an item. So you still want to find good bases and decent gear with stats that you want, but then from there you can kind of do whatever you want to it. Remove modifiers, reroll modifiers, upgrade modifiers, randomly change modifiers, anything you can think of, probably doable. And because the game is designed for single player, you do get a ton of crafting materials, so you're never really out of stuff to play with, and it doesn't feel like Poe, which is designed around tiny drop rates and trading. Again, you can actually craft your own decent gear without issues. There's a lot more to the crafting system, but that could take forever to get into all the little nuances with it, with like legendary drops and stuff. But the only thing I want to say before I move on is that the legendary items are awesome. Uniques you can basically craft stats onto, it's huge. Basically, no more finding garbage uniques. You can actually craft truly unique items. So sure, there is still some garbage stuff out there, but everything dropped has potential to be amazing and build defining. So it's good stuff. But alright, moving on. So as far as content goes, Last Epoch does have a good solid foundation right now, but obviously being an early access game, it still needs some work. But I feel like the core experience is good right now. The campaign isn't done, but I think we're at like chapter 9 or 10 if you want to think of it like acts. And yeah, it takes about an hour to complete a chapter, maybe a little less, so it's kind of similar to Poe, but again, it's not done, so we do still have more to look forward to there. Sadly though, you do have to go through it all again for each character you want to make. I know that's kind of a big complaint for people in the Poe community right now, so you will be doing the campaign a lot. And also for some reason, like the newest chapters that are out, I think like 8 through 10, have like some crazy absurd power creep difficulty. Like you're going to be going from like stomping maps of bosses to getting one tapped by everything when you go from like chapter 8 to 9 or 9 to 10. I forget where we're at. But anyway, it's super weird, and I hope that gets fixed because the scaling just feels kind of bad. And it does feel awful to have to stop the campaign, level in the endgame monoliths, then come back to finish the campaign. I don't think that's supposed to be like that. Speaking of the endgame monoliths, these work kind of like replaying the acts with random modifiers and stuff. So you're going to pick a timeline, which is basically an act, do a bunch of random maps with random rewards at the end, stack up modifiers to give enemies more effects, damage, life, whatever, and then that increases your drop rates and EXP gained. And then when you do enough of them, you do the story maps, and then fight a boss at the end, and ta-da, rinse and repeat. Each timeline does give you a blessing that is permanent, for that character only of course, and provides a buff that either increases your stats or drop rates or something else. And these can be re-rolled, and you can acquire a new blessing each time you redo a timeline. And also each timeline has a boss that has unique loot pools, so there are reasons to rerun timelines, and you're going to be doing it a lot. You can also build up corruption, which is basically done by just continuing to run the same timeline, and this will add permanent health and damage modifiers to all the maps within the timeline. And then so also permanently increases the EXP and drop rates as well. So you're going to want to run timelines, which is like maps, stack corruption, and when you're at like 300 plus corruption, it's going to be like doing red maps and Poe kind of thing. So you just stack enemy damage and life and you get more stuff out of it. I know I totally butchered the explanation on that, but it's a fun system. The core here is good. There are also dungeons which do have unique effects, layouts, and bosses, and rewards, which are certainly entertaining to do. Like Soulfire Bastion has you alternate protection barriers between fire and necrotic damage. Lightless Harbor has you collecting flames to keep your light going, and then you use that fire to clear passages. Temporal Sanctum flips you in and out of timelines to progress and deal with mechanics, stuff like that. And these all have tiers of difficulty, so you can do them early on, but obviously they give much better rewards at the higher tiers, but at least you can experience them and practice in them at the lower tiers. You do need keys to do these even in the lower tiers, so it is a limited resource, but honestly keys drop often enough that you can usually do it whenever you want. Boss fights also are pretty good in Last Epoch. They follow the formula of like showing you where the attack is going to hit and expect you to get out of the way or eat fat damage. But I like being able to see what's coming because in these kind of games, it gets hard to see what's on the screen at times. There's a lot going on. So having well telegraphed attacks like that with cones or circles that like tell you what's going to happen makes it much easier to play against as a player. And so this way, even though you have like a lot of minions or a lot of like stuff on the ground, you can still see what's coming. And as I did mention earlier, Last Epoch doesn't have some of the more infuriating parts of Poe, like enemies that have tons of different on-death effects or ground degens or random explosions after death. So you don't really have to worry about nonsense like that. Also, each of the rare enemies accurately describe what they do, which is kind of cool, rather than have these abstract modifiers like Poe's Arch Nemesis system, where they have like 6 modifiers wrapped into one name and you have to remember all of them. So fighting enemies is a lot smoother than in Poe. Also because the game itself moves a lot slower, there's more emphasis on resource management, so you aren't just blowing through screens of enemies at lightning fast paces. There's actually time to take in what's going on, and you can actually see the game, which shouldn't be weird, but it kind of feels like it is. And as much as I've talked about praise about Last Epoch, there's obviously still some issues that I hope get worked out. mostly the multiplayer, which should be arriving this year. As a single player game, it does feel rather hollow knowing that I don't need to pick up anything I don't plan on using, nothing has resale value, and I can't really hold on to gear to trade or give to friends, and that sort of thing. So when you're at the end game grinding corruption levels and you've already killed all the bosses, you begin to wonder, why bother keep playing? Which is fine, it's not like you have to play the game all the time, but there does seem to be a hard wall of, okay, you're done, you did it all, which does keep me from committing more time to the game right now. Besides multiplayer, I mentioned earlier that most of the player power comes from the passive tree, and besides some legendary items that you can make, most of the gear doesn't give you a huge jump in power that you'd want, so making upgrades here barely makes a noticeable difference to your build. While it does feel shallow, even though the modifiers you can get on your gear affect your build greatly, being just stuck to 2 offensive and defensive stats essentially makes the gearing feel much less impactful than it needs to be. These kinds of games thrive on the gear, and while I love the crafting systems they have for sure, I wish the gear itself was more powerful. It's a small complaint, but I think it's important. And lastly, I think Last Epoch needs more communication. I feel that a lot of the hype and anticipation for the game has died off because the last major update was like in March, and it's October now, and the only thing we've really heard was that multiplayer was coming by the end of the year, which may or may not be the case. And even if it was, for an early access game, you really need to keep players informed and hyped about the title, and it's been almost 9 months since the last big update, so I know a lot of people have kind of left. I feel like this is an issue with having a fully remote dev team, since it can't be easy to keep everyone on the same page when they have vastly different time zones. But I feel like this game will die before it can truly shine, because Diablo 4 and Path of Exile 2 are coming, and I feel like this game will still be in early access when those come out. And no one's going to look back at this game that's been on Steam in early access for almost 4 years and then want to jump in. But I might be wrong, I hope I'm wrong. I know the developers run their monthly QA stream kind of thing, but they don't really put a bunch of patch notes and other what we're working on stuff on the Steam page and their forums and stuff like that. So I feel like most people aren't going to sit through a multi-hour dev stream to try and pick out what's going on. I feel like they should just be more upfront about the communication and show everything on the front page. Hey, this is what we're working on, this is what's coming out. But obviously we know it's multiplayer, but we don't have an actual date of when that's happening. So yeah, a lot of obscurity. Anyway, that's all I got to say about Last Epoch for now. I actually want to make more content and videos for this game because I do truly think it has what it takes to be the next great ARPG. I just hope it doesn't completely die off before it has a chance to launch. So I want to keep the game in the limelight, and I hope to get more people to try it out. Also, I would like to thank the Patreon members now who are subscribed to me. I started a Patreon even though I didn't really want to, but I feel like I need to given my current life situation. So I appreciate all the support. Honestly, I really do. Even if it doesn't sound like it, I'm just a monotone, monochromatic person. But yes, thank you to all my Patreon supporters. So thank you all for watching. Good luck out there, and expect more videos from me soon.